So this is the science of high IQ and mental illness, and this is a proper broadcast. I've had a bit of glitchiness going on in the past, but this is going to work now. So yay! So if you're new to this type of format, this was a topic that was voted on by my viewers, and they wanted me to talk about the connection between high IQ and what we would consider mental illness. So I'm going to discuss that today. So thankfully, everything's working. So if you have questions and you're on the Periscope app, you can ask me directly, but fear not. If you don't have the app and you still have questions, you can always ask me on twitter.com. I'm also on Facebook. You can just shoot me with the hashtag HeyScientistMel and I'll be able to find it because I check it all the time. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about the science of high IQ and mental illness. So first, we've got to address what are IQ tests, all right? And there's multiple assessments that are normally used with this sort of thing. And they're used to determine personality as well as intelligence based in strengths, as well as identifying potential symptoms associated with learning disabilities. These also help identify patterns of symptoms associated with mental illness. Now, as you can see, the WISC-3 is the current test that they use, and it's the third revision by a psychologist named David Wechsler, and it's based on his classic 1949 test for children, which was modeled after Army intelligence tests that were developed during World War I. Now, this other test, the Differential Ability Scales and the Cognitive Assessment System, also known as CAS, helps teachers develop interventions for children with learning concerns. And it also allows identification of children with learning disabilities as well as attention deficit disorder. Now, it is considered a fair assessment, especially for children from diverse backgrounds. So this is actually a pretty good set of tests to have, and a lot of psychologists, they'll use several tests and not just one IQ test because they want to test for various things, verbal, nonverbal communication, as well as math and that sort of thing, problem solving, both mathematics as well as nonverbal problem solving. So they use a lot of different tests to help kind of see where people are at. So here we have Prince, just shaking his head no. So we're going to talk a little bit about IQ tests and historical criticisms that have been associated with it. So intelligent testing has in the past been accused of unfairly stratifying test takers by race, gender, class, and culture. It's also been accused of minimizing the importance of creativity, character, and also practical know-how. Now, it kind of also promotes this idea that people are born unchangeable in intellectual potential, and that somehow determines their potential success in life. Well, many of these biases have been identified, that these biases that have been identified by critics have actually been reduced. So these particular concerns have been taken into consideration, and now new available tests that psychologists use are based on modern theories of brain function. However, more understanding is needed, especially for the brain, because we need to actually effectively quantify intelligence and creativity just a little bit better. So let's talk a little bit about what these high IQ tests, or these IQ tests, actually measure. So what do these tests measure? Well, it's not just raw intelligence we're finding out. In 2011, there was a study performed by a Dr. Duckworth involving meta-analysis of individuals who were given monetary compensation for scores. And what they found is that lower compensated individuals had lower scores than those with higher compensation. And it was roughly about 20 IQ points. So, that's quite a bit. So 20 IQ points more for, having more money. So what does this tell us? The promise of monetary compensation can induce people to be determined and motivated to score a bit higher. So we're not just measuring raw intelligence now here, are we? We're looking at motivation as well. So that might actually play a significant role. And another thing to think about, IQ scores can change. Life experience can play a role. If you have positive or negative experiences in your life, we know that negative experiences can actually have effect on your brain in regards to the interactions with there, and sometimes structures can change too. Positive interactions and positive experiences can have an effect on your brain as well. And it's also important to note, ability is not the same as knowledge. So you can study and study and study and learn a lot of stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're capable. So, even though you might be able to spit words back out, that doesn't necessarily mean you're able to construct, complex thought and things like that. So we have to kind of keep that in mind as well. So let's touch a little bit on creativity, because we know that genius is often associated with creativity. But the problem is there's no substantial creativity tests because it's abstract and it's hard to quantify. But we still associate genius with creativity, and rightly so. But we got to be careful, because since linking creativity to mental illness, and that there is no established test to measure it. And yet we know creativity is a measure of genius, but we can't quite measure it totally. And success in a particular art doesn't necessarily mean that you're highly intelligent. So we can't, it's kind of one of those abstract things. How do we quantify that? Oh, please see Parrot. They can spout out big words too. Yes, they can, can't they? They repeat what they say, what they hear, don't they? If a family is particularly sweary, they'll find out in their parrots, right? So let's talk a bit about what we customarily associate with genius and mental illness. So, sorry, hair gets all on my face sometimes. Makes the nose itch. Has nothing to do with this. But anyway, so mental illness. We know that we see geniuses struggle with various symptoms of what we would consider mental illness. How do I feel about IQ testing in children? Okay, I'll answer that question very quickly. Having been tested myself and known children to be tested, I think it's really important, but not based on one test. If you go to a properly trained psychologist, they will do psychometric testing. Now, psychometric testing usually takes about 2 to 3 days. And what they do is they spend several hours one-on-one with the child. They test them for nonverbal communication, verbal communication, problem-solving skills in regards to math, as well as problem-solving skills that are nonverbal, to be able to, understand things a bit better. And I've known children that have tested higher than adults on like nonverbal problem-solving, but weren't, very verbal. And it also allows psychologists to kind of say, okay, they know what the patterns are associated with learning disabilities when it comes to this type of testing. Now, if you have a child that has been tested and has been diagnosed with a particular learning disability, it's important that you do regular testing, because IQ scores can change. Oftentimes, and the symptoms that may present may be related to ADHD, and then you don't find out until they get around 9 or 10 that maybe they were on the spectrum for Asperger's, because when they're really young, a lot of those symptoms can change and present differently. So psychometric testing when it comes to children is actually important if it's done by a licensed psychologist, not just generalized across the school, but if you have somebody that's testing multiple tests, not just one test, but several, and it usually takes 2 to 3 days. So I think it's a good thing, but you need to make certain that you're not basing everything on a single test. Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad I was able to answer your question. So, yes, I'm all for it as long as it's a proper licensed person that knows what they're doing and they use like 3 or 4 tests. Usually that's what they do. All right, so we're going to talk about associating mental illness and what we normally see. Some link it to like a tortured genius type of thing. They have this mental stuff that they're dealing with, and they just cope with it the best that they can. Oftentimes we see mood disorders associated with individuals that have this high intelligence, and bipolar shows up a lot. So one particular study that I'll talk about, they tested the intelligence of 700,000 Swedish 16-year-olds, and they followed up 10 years later to learn if any of them developed any kind of diagnoses for mental illness. And the results were published in 2010, and this is what they found. They found that people who excelled when they were 16 years old were 4 times as likely to go on to develop bipolar disorders. Now, this was 700,000 teenagers, so that's a pretty big sample size. Now, in 2012, another study was done that was performed showing bipolar disorder was prominent among creativity professors. So professors in the arts, they found had a high incidence of bipolar, and no other diagnosed mental illness seemed to manifest in the study. Okay, so what about the tortured genius? So that's a quote type of thing that we see a lot with Van Gogh. He was the tortured genius, or Van Gogh. He was hospitalized at one point. John Nash, who's a beautiful mind, had schizophrenia, and so we kind of see them as this smart individual that's capable of amazing things, but is inherently tortured by their own brain. So that's kind of what we're going with the tortured genius kind of thing that a lot of people associate with high IQ and mental illness. So let's talk about a few of these geniuses. So we have Frida Kahlo. She suffered depression and anxiety, as did Van Gogh, but he also had epilepsy and had bipolar disorder. So they both are brilliant artists, high creativity, and we know that their work is phenomenal, and we're able to see that. Then we look at scientists. Isaac Newton, believe it or not, was thought to have paranoia and mood swings. And so he kept very much to himself. He's very antisocial, but he came up with Newton's laws of motion. Brilliant man. John Nash had schizophrenia and was hospitalized for it. If only the Swedes had cross-tested that group with more than 2 IQ test series. Yes, for real. That would have been interesting to see the progression, But then, John Nash, brilliant mathematician. And then we look at my picture's kind of like hopped over on top of Ernest Hemingway there, so I'm sorry, Ernest. Then we look at writers. Tolstoy, depression. Edgar Allan Poe and Hemingway had alcoholism as well, and it was kind of understood that they might have had depression on top of that, and both ended up taking their lives. It's believed that Edgar Allan Poe took his life. I think that's still kind of up in the air about that, but Hemingway did. And then lastly, we have other artists that we see. Robin Williams, actually, I know his IQ. It was tested on the genius level. I'm not certain about Chris Cornell or Chester Bennington, but their work is pretty profound, and they all suffered depression, and it was Chris Cornell, I think, was quiet about it, as Chester Bennington, I think, kind of worked through it in his music, and Robin Williams was very open about his drug addiction as well as the issues that he had associated with his depression. So now I want to talk a bit about the science of stuff. I really want to read this book. I've learned a bit about it, and I've been checking it out and reading some of Dr. Gail Salt's work. The book is called The Power of Different, The Link Between Disorder and Genius. And she's an American psychiatrist and a clinical associate professor of psychiatry at the New York Presbyterian Hospital, Weill Cornell School of Medicine. So she has this book where she's trying to shifts society's views from seeing these people as broken. We all get sick at some point in time, and we have to, treat our symptoms until we feel better. We get colds, we get viruses. Well, it's similar kind of with mental illness. These people aren't broken. They just have symptoms that need to be treated. And what she's finding is there's often a tie to a hardwired strength associated with these symptoms of mental illness. But the thing is we don't really have a clear line between what's a healthy brain and a mentally ill brain. We don't have that kind of information. And so what she's a part of is something called the Connectome Project, and you can Google it, and I'll post these slides on my website to where you can actually go through and check out everything that I've read about it. And what they're trying to do is to work with other neurologists and other people in neuroscience to upload MRIs and CAT scans, everything that they can associated with healthy brains, so they can see what the patterns are and map them. Because human brain structures can vary, but we want to be able to see these connections of how they're wired and where the activity is. We just don't have that for a healthy brain. You don't really hear about people going and get the brain scanned if they're healthy. So we need more information, and we need to be able to see these patterns. And so that's what she's doing with the Connectome Project. So let's talk about these advantages, okay? So some people have symptoms of mental illness. Guess what? There are pros, believe it or not. Oh, yes. I do have a video already there, but it's really kind of glitchy. And I do have a video, like I said, this video I've already done, and it is on YouTube, but it's very glitchy and the video is terrible. But this one that I'm recording now is going to be a lot better, so I will actually post this one on YouTube, and you'll be able to have access to it. So let's talk about all of these brain differences. So people with mental illness are not broken. They're different. So let's shift it to that, all right? So most creative people tend to have a brain difference, but are being treated, or it is mild, and they can see their strength. So essentially, people who are highly creative and do have symptoms of mental illness, brain's different, they're very mild. The symptoms are mild, or they're being treated, so they're able to see their own strength and they can grow, right? Where it becomes a problem, is when the symptoms are overwhelming. So intelligent determination is important, especially if you have symptoms. So if you're determined to get better and work towards that and go and get treated, you tend to see more successful people. Symptoms that are profound or overwhelming can prevent a person from finding that hardwired strength and talent. So if you have all of these symptoms and they're just so overwhelming to the point you can't think straight, of course, you're not going to see that strong talent that you have, that inherent hardwired strength that we see. So it can cloud that advantage, and it can cause self-doubt and confusion. So we have to look at this, and we see that there are some evolutionary advantages associated with mental illness, and that there are seemingly hardwired strengths that we see in these populations. Now, treatment of symptoms is what's key for success. So if you have symptoms of mental illness, it's important, we say mental illness, it's important to go treat those symptoms, so that way you can be successful, and sometimes that takes time. Healthy choices, according to Dr. Gale, healthy choices can quell some anxiety-related symptoms as well. Eating nutritious foods, fluids, avoiding alcohol, exercise, that sort of thing. Let's talk about some individuals who show advantages. ADD and ADHD individuals have exceptional creativity and intelligence. However, they're not usually given a space to allow them time to daydream and imagine. Sometimes treatments for overwhelming symptoms seem to dull some of the hardwired creativity. That may be true as well. I find from individuals that I've spoken to, they tend to see that if you have overwhelming symptoms, it takes time to find what the right balance is, if that makes sense. And sometimes people feel like, they don't quite feel like themselves. So that's when it comes into, okay, you have to talk to your psychologist, you have to talk to your psychiatrist. They're the ones that provide the meds. Your psychologist provides the counseling. And so you have to kind of figure out what's the balance to where you have optimum strength and hardwired creativity, awesomeness, and symptom levels. And that can take time because it's different for everyone. I mean, it really is. And so that's why you have to continue to seek treatment and figure out what that delicate balance is to where you can have the super awesome, hardwired strength and get the symptoms a bit quieter, So, yes. Moving back to ADD and ADHD, we see these exceptionally creative and high intelligence people, but we notice with children, they're not given time to just sit and think and imagine. They're not given that space. Now let's look at anxiety-based individuals. They have diligence and attention to detail, and rightly so. They are hypervigilant about it. Now, treatment is key for individuals with anxiety, especially if it's crippling. Now, there are some benefits to having performance anxiety. If you can push that anxiety with the performance anxiety into excitement about what you're going to do, you're like, oh gosh, I'm going to get in front of like 500 people and talk. Oh my God, I'm going to die. No, you got to go, oh gosh, I'm going to get in front of 500 people. This is exciting. They want to actually hear me say things. And so you kind of shift it to that excitement. Then that's one technique that Dr. Gale recommends. Worriers, guess what, worriers? You tend to be highly intelligent because you're thinking all the time, right? I have busy brain at night, and my brain likes to remind me of everything I'm not doing correctly or things that I need to do that I can't do at 3 a.m., because my brain is busy. So sometimes, worriers, they tend to be highly intelligent because they're thinking all the time. So if you're a worrier, there's that. Got to quell some of those symptoms though, right? So in summary, IQ tests ability to a degree. You need multiple tests in order to assess ability. There's no solid creativity measure. We don't have a good, solid, accurate test to measure levels of creativity because it's so abstract. And how are you gonna test that? It just kind of comes out and you're like, oh look, they are creative. Look at this stuff, but you can't preemptively do that right now. And also it's important to note that IQ scores can change. They change throughout our life, and it's important to kind of keep up with that. As I mentioned before, if you have a child who happens to test for a particular learning disability, it's important to test them when they're 5, when they're about 10-ish, and then maybe again when they're around high school age to see if the diagnosis is consistent, because symptoms can look differently at those different ages. The healthy brain is not completely mapped, and so that connectome project that I mentioned, brain changes can occur. So if you have positive or negative types of experiences, that can affect your brain. Now, different doesn't mean broken. People have symptoms for all kinds of different things. People who have colds aren't broken. They have symptoms of colds. I have allergies. I sneeze and I take so much Sudafed. If I don't take that, I'm non-functional. That doesn't mean I'm broken as a person. That means I need Sudafed, or I'm going to be snotty everywhere. Well, it's kind of the same with people who have symptoms that are associated to a particular thing. They're not broken, it's just different. We know that high creativity and intelligence is associated with people who exhibit symptoms. But the key factor is symptoms must be treated for success, because these symptoms cloud genius. And they do. So if you're busy with all this fog going on in your head, you can't see how awesome you are, and it generates a lot of doubt, which is also, a vicious cycle. So, this is my, I'm going to shrink myself down. These are all of the different sources I have. They're teeny tiny right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post these on my website, and you'll have access to them have about 15 things to read here. And then all of my image are via Google search. So we have that. And you'll be able to click on all the links once you get these access to these on my website. So I want to take a minute to thank all of my patrons. You hear a lot about research into treating depression with psilocybin. Any updates you know of? I don't, and I don't have the answer to that right now, but remind me on Twitter, and I'll look it up and I'll see what kind of information I can find. So it's psilocybin. Shoot me a tweet and I'll look it up. Put hashtag HeyScientistMel on there because my ats fill a lot. I should link my YouTube and website in my Periscope bio. Okay. I have my Patreon site, I believe, on my Periscope. But once I get scientistmel.com up, you'll be able to click on that directly and it'll take you to everything. Okay, will do. Thanks. Sweet. So I want to take a minute to thank my patrons on my Patreon account. I've gotten 2 more since I made this. So my other 2, I know one's Mark and the other one I haven't communicated with, but it's just happened today. So that's nice. I have new patrons. So I want to thank Tony, somebody who wants to be anonymous, Jen, Carl, Anthony, Paula, Patrick, Tony, Jennifer, Mark, and there's a new patron on Patreon in their name. I have not contacted them yet, so I have to add them on the next one. So this has been the Science of High IQ Mental Illness. You can find me everywhere here, and by the middle of next week, I should have scientistmel.com up. Currently have the audio podcast, which is accessible on my Patreon account. I believe the very first one is available if you are not a patron. I just put the second one up, which is early access for my patrons, but you can go to my site and listen to the first one, and then you'll be able to hear the second one a week from now. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. So this has been the Science of High IQ and Mental Illness. I'm so glad this worked now. Oh, yay! And if you're interested, I do have previous talks on my Periscope account, and then all of my new formatted ones I've put over on YouTube. Climate change was very popular. You can direct people to that one if they don't quite understand the science of it. But you can always hit me up on Twitter. Hey Scientist Mel is the best way to get me because my ats, I mean, for real, they fill up really quickly. So if you want to ask me something, hit me up there. And thank you for watching. I'm so glad I got this one out. Yay! You guys have been awesome, and I always enjoyed doing this. This is my only job right now, and so this is something that's important to me, and I love it. So you need to, you get certain individuals to listen to this. Yes, that would be quite helpful. Oh, thank you. So yes, if you want rewards, you can check out my patreon.com/scientistmel. You get artwork, you get access to exclusive videos, as well as early access to my podcast. So if you can spare $1 a month, that helps me out. If not, RT something. I just love doing this, and this is a lot of fun for me, and I'm glad I can share with you guys, and I'm glad you're here. So have an awesome day, and I will see you guys around. Squishy science hugs and stuff. Have a great day. Bye.